Hi team, Charmaine here. Today I'll be talking to you about scheduled medications. In your lab lesson this week, your patient case scenario will require you to administer an oral scheduled medication. Now some of you might have already been able to observe this process being performed during your clinical placement periods. And this is where two nurses will go to the drug cupboard together, unlock the drug cupboard, count how many of a particular type of medication there is, and sign it out in a drug book. They'll also, depending on the type of medication it is, go to the patient together to witness the administration. And so this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about in depth during the presentation today. Following the presentation today, I encourage you to also watch the short procedural video so that you'll be prepared going into your actual lab lesson later this week. So the role of the Australian government in regulation of the pharmaceutical industry is to protect the health of the public by ensuring that medications are safe and effective. The Therapeutic Goods Act of 1989 regulates all drugs developed or imported into Australia. It controls medication manufacture, sales, distribution, things like medication testing, naming and labeling even as well. So the nurse is responsible for following legal provisions when administering controlled substances or opioids, such as those that we know as Schedule 8 medications. And these are carefully controlled through national and state regulations. Violations of the relevant acts, such as the Therapeutic Goods Act, are punishable by fines or imprisonment and may lead to loss of your nursing registration. Hospitals and other healthcare institutions have policies for the proper storage and distribution of controlled medicines. So I understand and I acknowledge that the content that I'm delivering today can seem quite dry, but I want to bring it back to why this is so important. And this is an image taken from a news article which reported on the 2011 Quakers Hill nursing home fires. Those fires were deliberately lit by a nurse who was working at the institution, and he was trying to cover up his theft of prescription drugs. That blaze killed 14 elderly residents. He is currently serving life in prison for the murder of 11 people who died in the fire. Even after the fires were put out, he even went back into the facility to try and retrieve the records which indicated that that prescription drugs and drugs of addiction were missing because he had stolen them for his own personal use. So poisons, so I'm referring to medicines here, are listed in schedules. And so this is what you can see on the screen here. And these detail their availability to the public. For example, medicines listed in Schedule 4 are restricted to medical, dental, or veterinarian prescription, and depending on the state, nurse practitioners as well. The nurse is responsible for following legal provisions when administering such controlled substances or opioids, and opioids are something that you'll already be familiar with from your first semester in Nurse 5082, when you learned about patient-controlled analgesia and how often that medication will be an opioid medication such as morphine or fentanyl. And those are Schedule 8 medications under the Australian Poison Classification Schedule, as shown on the slide. And these are carefully controlled through national and state regulations, as I said, and violations of the acts are punishable by fines, as we've heard in the previous slide. The schedules that we're really concerned about in our practice as nurses are Schedule 4 and Schedule 8. So Schedule 4 are restricted substances and Schedule 8 are controlled substances, and they're indicated by the 2 arrows on the screen. And we'll go a little bit more into both of these schedules. So keep in mind that the nurse who is in charge of the ward is responsible for the storage of all medications in the ward. So during the day, most wards will have a nursing unit manager who's present, but all shifts have a team leader who is the most senior nursing staff member on shift. That nurse, must ensure that medications are stored in accordance with the legal requirements and that the correct conditions are met in relation to security, temperature, and stock rotation. And stock rotation is referring to expiry date. And that's why we always check expiry date in our medication checks. So there are a lot of guidelines around the safe administration of controlled medications as listed in the schedule. For example, all controlled medications have to be stored in a locked, secured cabinet. A registered nurse carries the set of keys for this controlled drug cupboard, and you might have seen that on clinical placement. Sometimes there is a system where, if a nurse or if a patient requires a scheduled medication to be signed out of the drug cupboard, they'll ring a doorbell, and that'll play, and that'll notify the nurse who has the keys to come out to come to the nurse's station to help sign out those medications. Or it might be one of the places where I used to work would literally ring a handbell. Now we're in the place where I currently work. They just yell out across the recovery room, "Who has the keys?" So there's always a registered nurse that carries this set of keys for the drug cupboard, which contains Schedule 8 medications. Now, at the change of every shift, one of the nurses who is going off duty will go with the nurse from the most senior nurse from the oncoming shift to check and count all the drugs in the drug cupboard. And this check will be written in the drug register in red ink. So as I had mentioned about this drug register, this is a special inventory record that is used each time that a controlled drug is dispensed. And in the drug register, which we'll go into later in this presentation, this record is used to document the patient's name, date, time of the administration, the name of the medication, the dose, the signature of the nurse who is administering the drug, and also the name and the signature of the nurse who will be witnessing the medication administration. If there are discrepancies in drug counts, these are to be reported immediately to the department manager, so usually that will be your nursing unit manager. Pharmacy, if there is a pharmacy in the facility that you're working in, and there needs to be an incident report submitted, and this is often being termed as IMS if you work in a New South Wales public health facility. So Schedule 4 medications, before we go into Schedule 8 medications, these are restricted substances. These are prescription-only medications other than Schedule 8. They include those medications that are listed in Appendix D. So sometimes you'll also hear the term S4d and S8 drug cupboard because those can be stored together. So we're looking specifically at S4d and S8 medications when we look at controlled storage. So all S4 medications have to be stored out of patient and public access, either in a locked cupboard securely attached to a part of the premises, or in a locked room, or a locked medication trolley. And so a lot of the wards where many of you went for clinical placement would have had a medication room that maybe was swipe access, and maybe you didn't have that swipe access, so you could only go in there when accompanied by your supervising registered nurse. And so a lot of those prescription medications will be sitting in some kind of storage container in the medication room, or they'll be in some wards they are in medication trolleys organized by bed number, and those medication trolleys can be locked and then placed into the medication room, which, as I said, is sometimes swipe access. So we have Schedule 4 medications, which are restricted substances and prescription-only medications. And then we have this subset, which is Schedule 4 Appendix D, so S4d for short. And these are the Schedule 4 medications that are liable to abuse or misuse. And as such, these require additional requirements for storage in patient care areas. S4d medications include benzodiazepines, anabolic steroids, ephedrine, and medications like that are often sedatives or things that we give patients as pre-medications before surgery. S4d drugs must be stored apart from all other medications except for Schedule 8 drugs in a separate sturdy cupboard, preferably a metal safe, which is securely attached to the wall, to the floor, and kept locked when not in immediate use. And this is from New South Wales Health Medication Policy, and the reference is at the end of this presentation. So it seems extensive, but this is why I placed the relevance at the beginning of this presentation. It can seem over the top to have these requirements, you know, a metal safe securely attached to the wall. But you know, the worst possible outcome, you know, we've seen that happen, and it is a possibility. So this is why we have these regulations in place. Now let's look at Schedule 8 medications, which we know are controlled substances, and in particular, how we store them. So consideration should be given for the security of Schedule 8 medication storage units to include closed circuit television or CCTV monitoring. And this is certainly the case of what happened during those nursing home fires in Quakers Hill in 2011. There was CCTV monitoring so they could see how many times, and not just outside of the medication room, but around the facility, and so they could see that nurse enter and exit the medication room several times, including to take out the drug books even after the fires had been put out, accompanied by you know, fire personnel. In accordance with local policies, when a patient care area is closed for any purpose, any keys to that area's Schedule 8 medication storage unit should be either stored in a metal torch and drill resistant key safe, securely attached to the wall or floor of the patient care area, or handed over to the registered nurse or midwife in charge of the facility. So for example, where I work in recovery, if at the end of the shift, you know, if we don't have any patients going throughout the evening, and we can go home, and the person who's on call will take over, and if there's a patient emergency, then they'll come in to recover that patient. But we will shut down recovery after the last patient is fully recovered, and we would give those drug cupboard keys to the after hours nursing manager. So the witness to a Schedule 8 medication transaction, or you know, the count, and the witness of administration, needs to be a person who is familiar with the Schedule 8 medication handling and recording procedures. And so this includes a registered nurse, a registered midwife, an authorized prescriber, a registered pharmacist, it could be your an anaesthetist that you work with, and any other person authorized by the registered nurse or registered midwife in charge of the patient care area to complete this task, such as an enrolled nurse. The witness must be present during the entire procedure, that is, the removal and replacing of the medication from the Schedule 8 medication storage unit, and the preparation of the medication, such as drawing it up in a syringe, and the discarding and rendering unusable any unused portion of the medication. So if you've already, if it comes in tablet form, but you only need to give half the tablet, then you need to discard the unused half, and that discard of the unused portion needs to be also witnessed by your second nurse. The removal and the witness must be present during the entire procedure, as I said, and this also includes the recording in the drug register, and the transfer to the patient, and the administration to the patient as well. So here's an image on the right of the screen of the drug register, or the drug book. This is must be used to record the receipt, the administration and supply of Schedule 8 medication, also known as drugs of addiction, with a witness in health facility patient care areas. And this is, again, under the New South Wales Poisons and Therapeutic Goods legislative requirements. You'll be able to see these books in your lab lessons this week, and you will be actually signing out medications and really just following through with this procedure. So later in this presentation, I'll show you what the pages look like, so that you can get a preview of what what the process entails. So the drug books are bound and sequentially numbered. Each book has a contents page at the beginning, which will indicate what medications are dedicated to which page and where you can find them listed on which page. It has a separate page for each form of medication, its strength, its brand as well. And a signature record or register is maintained by the nurse in charge, and often what that looks like is just that every employee of the ward will sign, put their signature on a form, and that's kept so that people know whose signature belongs to who. When we're recording in the drug books, we record the amount of the medication that we're administering to the patient, as well as how much we are discarding. And if we're not discarding anything, then we just write that we're discarding 0 amount. So when we are recording this, we need to be accurate. So what's considered acceptable is for liquids, we write this in milliliters, or for solid dosage forms, we put this as discrete units, for example 1 or 0.5 when we're using tablets, if the medication is suitable to be given as half a tablet or a part of a tablet. For ampules, such as medications that are liquids in glass ampules, we can write this as discrete units as 1 ampule or 0.5 for half an ampule. Or we can write this down as the dose, so if it's 10 milligrams of morphine or 5 milligrams of morphine. And this just depends on what the local hospital policy is about this. When we're writing the amount discarded, where there's only a portion of the medication, and this again might be a tablet or a liquid medication that can be injected, when there's only a portion of the medication that's administered, we have to put the amount that's destroyed and the balance that's remaining in the drug register after the transaction. When entries are being made into the drug register, you can't make any false or misleading entries, but you also can't make any alterations, obliterations, or cancellations. That is, you can't put any lines drawn through entries, even if it's a single strike through. That's considered unacceptable for a ward drug book. It can't be scribbled out, crossed out in any way, and you can't change any of the numerals once you've already written it down in ink. So if a mistake is made, the entry has to be left as it is, and it's marked with an asterisk, rewritten on the corrected on the line underneath, and that needs to be countersigned by another nurse or another witness with a note explaining the error. So that just might mean incorrect date. That might be the reason why the reason for the error. I'm going to show you what the documentation of errors looks like. I can show you what that looks like shortly. So this is what the inside of the drug register or the drug book actually looks like. You have at the top the name of the medication, the dosage, and the form that it comes in. So endone 5 mg tablets. The ward is here up on the right, so we're in surgical 1 ward. And then across in this row we have the date, the time received or given. Most often it's time that you're giving the medication. The patient's name. Where I work, it's common that we'll write the patient's last name in uppercase letters first, and then the patient's first name in lowercase after that. Amount received is when you actually receive that medication, so you've run out of that, and so you might ask from the pharmacy, can you bring up more, and then that's where you'll put in the amount received. After that we have amount given, discarded. The balance is how much is left now in the drug cupboard after you take what you need or what the patient needs, the name of the prescriber. Then you have these columns just for printing your name, and at where I work we just put our first initial and last name. Then we put our signature. The person who is coming with you to witness the administration and who is at the drug cupboard with you puts their first initial, last name, and then signature. And so with the example that we have on the screen, we can see that on the 4th of October at 6 p.m, Joe Bloggs had 1 endone 5 mg tablet. There was previously 17 tablets in the drug cupboard, and after they took 1 out for Joe Bloggs, there was 16 left. The anaesthetist was, that's me because that's where I work. The medical officer who prescribed the medication is Dr. Carrie Grant, and then the nurses who administered the medication were Cinderella D and Cody Banks, as indicated by printing their name and placing their signature in the appropriate columns. After that, we've got 15 minutes later, patient Santa Claus required half a tablet of endone 5 mg. So they only had 2.5 mg dose. Because they only required that 2.5 mg dose, or half a tablet, half was discarded, and so that would have been thrown away in the sharps bin. And so there was 15 tablets left in the drug cupboard after that was taken out for patient Santa Claus. Same medical officer and same nurses who are going to take out the drug from the drug cupboard and witness the administration to the patient. So this page just shows you, just makes it a little bit more clearer, the discarding of the medication. So half of the tablet was given, half was discarded, and that's written on the same line. And the only reason why they say specifically it's recorded on the same line is because our old drug books, you had to write a separate entry for discarding medications. But anyway, the form is now changed. And this was some years ago now. And as it says here, discard any unused amount of medication into the sharps container with the witness seeing that you're doing that and watching you do that. Now this is what I was referring to before when I was talking about correcting errors. So what our usual rule is if there's any handwritten forms in health facilities that if we made an error, we would do a single strike through. Write written in error, do your signature next to that as well. In a drug book that is not acceptable, you cannot do any strike through, scribbles, obliterations, changing of numbers. Oh, I just wrote 8, or I was meant to write 5, so let me just change the numbers over. You can't do that. What you will need to do is here you place an asterisk next to the entry that you have written in error, and you leave it as it is. The following line is where you can make the correct entry, and at the bottom where it says here footnotes, you have an associated asterisk, the date and the time that corresponds with the error entry, and then next to it has that explanation. So it says written error, wrong amount written, and so it's been now correctly written on the next line, and it's got the 2 nurses' signatures there, and so the one in green is the correct entry. It often happens that when students are doing this lesson, every year we have a lot of errors in the drug book, and that's fine because I still do them at work. Everyone makes errors, and you just need to follow the right process. So no single strike through, no crosses, no scribbles, single asterisks, and then at the bottom in footnotes, asterisks, date, time, what the error was, and write your correct entry in the row underneath. So when a registered nurse administers a Schedule 8 drug or medication to a patient, remember that usually there's, when it says another person, that is another nurse is present to witness the procedure, or a medical officer, but in most cases it will be another one of your nursing colleagues. And then witness needs to be present during the entire procedure, and that's really important. There's always 2 nurses, and that they go to the drug cupboard together. They count how many of that medication is in the drug cupboard. They write in the entry into the drug book. They count, they confirm, they print their name, they provide their signatures. They remove it from the drug cupboard, they dispense it, they go to the patient with the medication, they witness the administration of the medication to the patient. So if it's a tablet, they watch, both nurses will need to observe the patient ingesting that medication. If it's an injection, the primary nurse will administer it, and the witness will watch them administer that dose to the patient. If there's any part of that medication that's discarded, they also need to witness that. So regular audits of drug registers or drug books are carried out for the purpose of monitoring, and this is, of course, to be compliant with legislative requirements, and to detect any possible misuse of drugs. And just for a little bit more background information, audits are performed by 2 staff members. who are authorized under the local health policy to local hospital policy to perform the task, and one of the staff members must be independent of that ward area. And it includes checks of entries, recording stock received against the patient care area records from pharmacy, and they verify and check the signatures. They check for forgeries even. They verify the drug register contents pages, look at how many was carried forward, if people are really scribbling, obliterating entries, not doing the correct error processes, if there's any kind of discrepancies between what's written in the patient's drug medication records, where they say, this amount of drug was given, but then in the drug book it says that a portion was discarded. So everything needs to really line up when it comes to documentation, and audits really are performed. So loss of an S4d or S8 medication needs to be reported immediately to the nurse in charge of the ward. An IMS report or an IMS report needs to be completed, and everything needs to be corrected in terms of the record. There have been a couple of times where we have thought we had lost a medication in a hospital, in the hospital where I used to work. There was even a time where I signed out some medication with one of my colleagues, and it was a glass vial, and it just slipped out of my hand, landed on the floor, cracked open, and all the contents spilled out. And so it obviously wasn't administered to the patient, and luckily it was during the day, and my nursing unit manager wasn't too far off, and I didn't touch it, and I just said, can you come and have a look at this? I haven't touched it. It's all, there on the floor, glass shards and all, and you can see that we haven't touched it, but, and it also hasn't been given to a patient. So, even something kind of small like that, in the place where I currently work, we had signed out an S8 tablet for a patient. It wasn't my patient; it was another nurse's, but I was the witness, and she was giving this tablet to a patient, and there were two. She was able to give the patient one of them, and the other one, it kind of just fell out of the medication cup, and we were trying to look for it everywhere. This small white tablet, and hospital bed sheets are white, and we're trying to find where this one tablet is, because we actually saw it bounce out or spill out of the cup, and we just couldn't figure out where it went. And we were racking our brains where it went. We, in recovery, we have these equipment trolleys next to every patient bedside, and we took out every drawer, every piece of equipment just to look for this one white tablet, because it was late in the evening, and we had to end up we waited until every single patient was out of recovery. Every patient was fully recovered. There were no patients left, and we got the torch, went close to the ground, shine the light to try and find any kind of shadow that this tablet might have cast. We thoroughly checked every patient's bed that as they left recovery. In the end, we finally found it really was actually sitting in the equipment trolley next to the patient's bedside. It was just so mental, and we were just glad that in the end it was found, and our records could all line up. So here's the last slide on references. I encourage you to read these references, especially if you want that practical guide on the drug book and how to record in that. That's from this one here, and the policy around medication handling, how the medication drug cupboards are metal safes secured to the floor or the wall of the facility, those kind of things. That's all set out in that New South Wales health policy.